Alright folks, how are you all doing this evening? I'm just getting do the mic check and make sure that you guys can all see me. So please take a moment, let me know in the chat when you guys can officially hear me. Let me fix this camera a little bit, where I'm sitting. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so anyway, Kevin's question, start off the bat here, is just simply how many questions there are going to be. Obviously, I already wrote that down there, so hopefully you guys just kind of read the topics of what we're planning to have for this test. You should hopefully know that by now, too. Ms. Skipperman, I know, I was not there last class, and I'm sure Mrs. Skipperman talked about it as well, just to remind you all. So anyway, the topics that are going to be on this test is going to be imperialism, which was done a little while ago at this point. We went through all of imperialism and then ultimately talked about World War I and the experiences there, and also a little bit about the post-World War I as well. And then lastly, the Russian Revolution is going to be the last piece of the puzzle there. So I'm not seeing any questions, which is obviously kind of the main purpose for this, but since it's been a little while from the beginning stuff, how about we kind of run through a lot of it again. So for starters, let's kind of show you where to find a lot of this stuff if you forget. So this is what your Blackboard should look like, or at least something similar, since mine is a teacher account. The cat has found his way up here onto me. So anyway, so this is what the Blackboard site looks like, right? You guys should all know that. Here's the reminders and things like that. There's Treaty of Versailles packet that we did, as well as your notes and things, which can all be found in this course documents tab. When you click on the course documents tab, there is the class Google Drive access. So when you click on that, it brings you to this page right here, right? So this is, again, a list of all of the stuff we've done. I kind of like going this way, so that way everything new is on top. So anything in this folder is going to be essentially fair game for this test. So let's kind of run into the imperialism stuff, what we talked about in class, and kind of let's run through a lot of that. So do I have a PDF made of that? So, is this the right? Yes, this is the right notes. This is too many slides on one page, so let me actually go to the Google slide here. So this, we kind of broke up the old Industrial Revolution stuff for you guys. So this is kind of going to fall, we're kind of following it more into the World War I stuff than the Industrial Revolution stuff, but it's kind of still labeled this. Obviously, we just didn't have this on the last test, so that's why it's falling into this one. So imperialism, what do we know about imperialism, right? So for starters, the big thing is that really these European nations, right, that are going to become economically successful, even more economically successful, I should say, as a result of the Industrial Revolution. What's going to happen? That actually doesn't show me. Sorry, I'm just testing something quick there. Anyway, sorry. Okay, so this is going to make people more successful, right? You're going to have a significant more output of goods and need for natural resources and markets for those goods, right? So these are the reasons why they are looking to expand. And this expansion is going to take on a number of different forms, but in the most cases, it's going to actually be land, right? I'm sorry, my foot is knocking the camera here for you guys. So anyway, right, those are the big reasons, and it's going to want to continue their economic success and ultimately increase that economic success as well, right? So that's kind of the big thing. I'm going to present this fully here so you guys can see the full screen. So the expansion is going to come from imperialism, right? And there are a number of different ways this imperialism is actually practiced, right? For starters, this is control of a country, right? And that control looks a number of different ways, right? So you can control the territory of another country, you can control the economy of another country, or you can control the political system of another country, right? Or you can control all of these things, right? It depends kind of in the situation that's going to happen, and they're going to be, the European powers are going to have different levels of these controls in Africa as well as Asia, right? So the goals, right, are going to be to bring in natural resources from these areas, right? And in doing so, they're going to be able to then take those natural resources back to the capital and industrial centers in Europe, where they are then able to turn those around and turn those into manufactured goods and then bring them back to the areas which they have colonized, right? And then sell them again as new markets, right? So this is also going to help secure economic success, right? If you can bring in more resources from these particular areas, then ultimately you're going to be more economically successful, right? And political success comes with that too, right? It looks good for the people, right? If your country is doing this, right? It's a prideful thing. It leads to nationalism, as it kind of says in the next part there, right? And then you're also going to get mission work, believe it or not, right? So a big part of it is this whole idea that we are going to help civilize these areas of the world, or at least England and these other colonies, I should say, really are going to help bring their culture and religion to these areas that have not experienced that, right? Similarly to the way it was done in the 1400s and 1500s, really, with the Spanish in Central America and Latin America. Right, and these things and these reasons are going to then spread the economic and political, social, and religious things all over the world, in particular in Africa and in Asia, right? So looking at Africa, I included this particular infographic here for a reason, to kind of show how big Africa actually is, right? Africa is enormous, and that's what we've got here, right? This enormous Africa. You can see how many different modern countries fit into Africa, and it really just goes to show the actual sheer size, right? Sometimes when you look at it on a map, you have different projections that show things differently. You don't necessarily get to see it, right? So you're going to have a conference that takes place in Berlin called the Berlin Conference, where these European powers are going to come together, and they are ultimately going to decide how they want to split up Africa in some capacity. And it's not going to necessarily hold to that perfectly, but there's a decision here by these European powers to go in and start claiming, right? And that happens in Berlin. You're going to have then the land grab, this great scramble for land, and obviously you got England here with this cartoon with all the different arms of the octopus grabbing different areas of the world in particular. Right, so I would definitely know these different forms of imperialism for the test tomorrow. Hint, hint, wink, wink. So one of them is the whole idea of colonies, right? And this is a complete control of another country, right? You have complete control economically, pretty much. You have complete control politically as well. So that's a big deal, right? You also then have protectorates, where it's a little bit different, right? You're not completely in control in some cases as you are with full-on colonies, right? But you are responsible there, and you are taking resources and things like that as well. And then you ultimately have the spheres of influence, which is an area of the world that is dominated by a certain country. And again, you have less, it's more indirect control in these cases, where you control it economically, right? But you might not necessarily control it politically, and your influence, it goes further, right? So imperialism in Africa and Asia in particular, they're going to be dominated by Europe in the 19th and early 20th centuries. They're going to create these colonies in these areas, right? And one of the big reasons why you can do this, right, is the increases of technology. Railroads going to allow resupply all of a sudden in the heart of the African continent, even Asia, right? You're going to have the machine gun, the Maxim gun, which is going to be used to devastate African armies, right? And you're going to have quinine, which is going to be used to prevent some of these diseases, right, mosquito diseases, things like malaria in particular, and that's that, right? All of a sudden, whereas they failed previously, they're going to be able to then push into Africa, right? So prior to 1880, right, Africa was seen mostly as a source for slave labor and slave trade, but ultimately that's going to go away, right? So these were protectorates with no real reason to completely fully take over, because you can control things, what you want specifically out of it with the slave trade, right? And the slave trade is going to decline around the world, and then things are going to change, right? But we get those new inventions, and all of a sudden we're able to conquer, right? You're able to take control of these areas. You're able to actually live there for extended periods of times with some of the new inventions, whereas previously you might not have been able to as a result of tropical diseases and things, and you're going to get much more of a permanent presence, right? The Berlin Conference settles this a bit, right? So Africa is going to be quickly divided, and you can see here what it kind of looked like, right? So this is what imperialism looks like on a larger scale come 1914, right before World War I, right? So we also talked about the Suez Canal being a major fruit of this conquest and imperialism, if you will, and the land grab. The Suez Canal is going to be this particular area between the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. I would also know that for tomorrow if I were you. Where they've cut through, this area to be able to build this, and all of a sudden you don't no longer have to go around this enormous continent to get to Africa, right? It cuts it down drastically, the distance, right? Huge difference, okay? So not to mention, we also do this carving up, or I really should say Europeans, not we. I was not involved. The Europeans, anyway, they start carving up Asia as well, right? And you're going to be getting these different influences in India by Great Britain, obviously in China as well. The French are going to be in Southeast Asia in particular. The Japanese are going to be plugging into Korea and also Manchuria area, where they're going to be running into problems with the Russians when you get the Russo-Japanese War. So anyway, things you need to recall and remember, right? Could anyway. So the resistance to these European, there's always going to be resistance, right? You're going to have resistance to the European imperialism by these particular areas, right? And in some cases, you're going to get intellectual movements, and you're going to get rise of nationalism in the colonies, where these colonies are going to, in particular, be looking for, they want to have they're prideful in their own countries, I should really say, right? And you're going to have the Indian Nationalist Party and things like that. You're also going to get the Sepoy Rebellion, which is going to ultimately be crushed, and it's going to lead to more direct control by the British, in particular, in this area, right? But that is then going to lead towards the Indian nationalism later on, and you're going to get Gandhi and all that stuff obviously a bit later. As far as the Opium Wars and things, China is going to go to war with England in the early 1800s as a result of this imperialism, right? After England floods China essentially. Sorry, I just want to check this in case it's a student asking about the live stream. Sorry about that. I just need to read that fast. So the England's going to flood China with this opium, right? Because China they were not willing to let England in. So when they kind of illegally, they kind of bring in this black market stuff, if you will, and get people hooked on it, then all of a sudden some of the Chinese are actually looking to get the English in there to bring in more opium and create more addicts and things like that. A long chain of events is going to lead to what's called the Boxer Rebellion in China as well, right? And the Boxer Rebellion is going to be this force, this Chinese force that's going to try and push out all this foreign influence in China that we've been talking about, right? You got the French kind of here in southern China, you got the English, you're going to have the Japanese coming in eventually too. America is going to work its way in with the open door system from John Hay. And ultimately, the Chinese are going to get fed up, and when it comes down to it, the worldwide community is going to come together, and they are going to crush this rebellion. So the Chinese are then kind of in control by the foreign powers for a number of years, really for a while, including America. So Japan, what do we need to know about Japan, right? Japan is ultimately a landlocked country, right, that we knew about. Sorry, landlocked. Why? It should be not landlocked. It's not landlocked. It's an island. I'm sorry. That's my mistake. You guys should obviously know that. Japan is not in the middle of places. But anyway, they had adopted this policy of isolationism, if you remember, from earlier in the year. No one in, no one out kind of thing. And ultimately, you are going to have America show up with this man named Matthew Perry, this Commodore. He's going to show up in Tokyo Bay with a number of warships and these modern ships, and Japan had kind of closed himself off from the modern world. They had no idea the technological changes that had been occurring. They were living in more or less the Middle Ages when we have a relatively modern warship show up in Tokyo, and this is pretty crazy to them, right? They're going to kind of backtrack. You're going to get the Meiji Emperor restored, which is called the Meiji Restoration. And ultimately, you're going to get a major push for rapid industrialization and modernization of Japan, which is then, they're in just a matter of 30 or 40 years, they are going to become a very strong player on the world stage, and they are going to start their own imperializing in China and Korea, and also get into a fight with Russia that we know that they are going to win. Okay, so that is more or less what you guys need to know for imperialism. So I guess it's time to kind of keep moving on here. So let's kind of scroll on to our World War I. Right? So, bringing it up. Open up the next one. So, World War I, right? This is going to, all the conditions that we just kind of been talking about is going to lead to a lot of different tensions, and we're going to get the world coming to war, right? So we know the big thing, and I don't have it listed out exactly like this, but the word that you're looking for is main, right? M-A-I-N, right? And they all stand for a number of different things, right? So not in any particular order here. Let's look at this, right? So you're going to have tremendous nationalism as a result of the colonization and just this tremendous pride that's going to grow in your country, partially as a result of unifications, right? You have the Franco-Prussian War, which is going to then lead to a German unified state. You're going to get Italian unification, which we've obviously talked about, right? And these people are actually going to be rooting for a single nation state, their own nation state, for the first time in maybe ever for these guys, right? They had been small kingdoms. That's a big deal, right? Germany's still going to have a bit of an emperor. His name is Kaiser Wilhelm, right? And he's going to be a big player in this because he's going to kind of help start all of this war, going forward. Obviously, the colonization that's going to help lead to more nationalism that we kind of been talking about, right? So I have this nice little comic of the people kind of following the nationalism flag off of the cliff, right? And that's kind of what we're getting into World War I, because a lot of people join up and sign up. We watched that little clip from All Quiet on the Western Front in class, and they're going to follow everyone into war, right? So this is, again, a recap of what the global imperialism is going to look like at the time. You got Russia up here, kind of in Manchuria as well. In 1914, America will have expanded into the Philippines and further into the Pacific. You're going to have, Hawaii over here and other small islands, Cuba, that we have taken from the Spanish. You're going to get the other European powers, obviously, in Africa as well, like we just covered. So this is convenient because I can just keep going, right? So the M in Main, M-A-I-N, stands for militarism, right? And this whole concept of the idea, if one nation increases its military strength, its rivals are going to feel threatened, and they're going to build up their own military, in response. That way they can protect their interests if for some reason one of the opposing factions will come at them, right? So A in Main is going to stand for the alliance system, right? Where you have all of these different countries kind of making agreements with one another, that if they go to war, well, then they might jump in too, right? If you join, I'll join, and we get this kind of deal right here. So you're going to have the Triple Entente, which is going to be Russia, France, and Great Britain. And you're going to get the Triple Alliance, which is going to become the Central Powers, is Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Germany. Although the funny thing is Italy's going to, once this haul goes down, Italy's going to kind of back out. They're not going to actually get involved, but the Ottoman Empire is going to come in on behalf of Austria, Hungary, and Germany. This is obviously a world war, so there are other powers involved, but these are the big players for sure. Okay? You're going to get the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, right? You have the man right here, Gavrilo Princip, is going to kill the Archduke Franz Ferdinand as part of this larger plot. If you remember, we talked about it in class. I'm not going to go through all the specifics because you don't necessarily need to know them for the test, but it is a really neat story if you don't remember. It's going to spark the powder keg, right? This is the event that sets everything going, right? And there is a failure of diplomacy here. And that doesn't necessarily said explicitly in the PowerPoint here, but it's really important to note there is a failure of diplomacy, which is what institutes the July crisis, right? As part of the July crisis, you have about a month from when the Archduke is killed to when the war is actually going to start. The hypothetical grenade, the pin could have potentially been put back in if they wanted to. But you had this sentiment for a growing war for a long time, and some people felt it was better to happen sooner rather than later. And for all sorts of different reasons, you're then going to get all the entangling alliances work together, and you're going to have a war, right? There's going to be this race to mobilize, and the whole idea of mobilization is gathering resources and troops in preparation for war and getting them on the front, essentially, ready to go. Because what happens if a war starts and someone's not there, right? People can just walk in and take territory, and it might not look good for you and your side, right? So you got to be ready. So the thing that fascinates me about World War I, right, is this whole idea of the old meets the new, right? And you have this rifleman with a pike on a horse with a gas mask and a helmet, right? It's just a really interesting contrast of a lot of different technologies and different ideas, right? So you're going to have all these new things that are going to completely change the face of war in general, right? You're going to have significantly improved cannons. Instead of shooting hundreds of yards, maybe 1,000 tops, like they did used to, you know, around Napoleon time. Now some of these guns are significantly stronger, shoot all sorts of different kind of shells, shrapnel, poison gas shells, and things like that. But they also shoot for miles and miles. Sorry, this cat is still on my lap. So you have airplanes starting to do aerial reconnaissance. You're going to get guns in airplanes later in the war, right? You're going to have tanks as a means of trying to kind of combat some of the trenches and also fight through and push through a lot of the barbed wire, which ends up being basically a what's the word I'm looking for? A bottleneck for troops as they rush across these no-man lands from the trenches, right? And yeah, so that's that. The barbed wire, you know, and the machine guns ultimately, obviously, too. That's not necessarily written here, but the machine guns are going to help mow down people like never before, right? So the reason why Germany decides to ultimately go to war, at least to start this whole thing up, right? This race to mobilization, right? You have the thought of a war had been happening for a long time, so these countries have like timetables that they need to follow if their plan is going to work. And Germany is part of one of these plans, right? You have what's called the Schlieffen Plan, who is this former general, and he is... The plan essentially is that if we go to war with France, which has been their common enemy for a long time, right? Ultimately, they're worried about Russia joining in too. So if that's going to happen, you know, Germany is, so I have a map here, where is it? So Germany is landlocked, not landlocked, but it's much harder. They're surrounded, right, by Russia and France and a lot of these other powers. Austria-Hungary is a much smaller power. Germany is the heart of this fight, right? So if Germany is going to have any shot in fighting, you know, the Russians and the French at the same time, they need to basically knock out the French quickly to then go back to Russia, right? And that's kind of what this whole idea of the Schlieffen Plan is, right? We're going to go take Paris, sweep around essentially, then we're going to swing back to the Eastern Front to go fight Russia, because Russia would be slower to mobilize. They were not nearly as industrialized, they were not nearly as put together, so the Germans thought, and there you go. And this almost succeeds, right? They get within 25 miles of Paris. You're going to get what's called the First Battle of the Marne, and it's called the Miracle on the Marne, right? We saw the video in class of the taxi cabs that are bringing people out to the front. And then this battle is going to include absolutely ridiculous numbers. We're talking 2.5 million men in this engagement, right? The Battle of the Frontiers is also, you know, you're going to have going on as well. And this is going to save Paris. It's going to stop the German advance, and you're going to have hundreds of thousands of people dead, right? These numbers are just absolutely mind-boggling in comparison to what we think of today anyway, right? You know, absolutely sheer volume of the fighting and how many people are dying in a day, right? The French lose 20,000+ on the first afternoon of this war, right? It's insane numbers, right? There's what I was saying in class is you have, you know, this famous quote by Joseph Stalin that one death is a tragedy and a million is a statistic, right? But you have to remember that every single one of those million people, you know, dying is a tragedy to somebody, right? Someone's wife or someone's kid, you know, some part of someone's family, brother, sister, right? That are being killed in this war. And a lot of the question comes down to is, you know, some of this fighting is considered almost senseless, right? You're going to have this stalemate, and you're going to have these charges, you know, that are going, you know, across no man's land that are doomed, essentially, these charges, right, from a lot of the new technologies, but the commanders just don't really learn too much, or they just stick to their old ways and the old tactics, right, that used to work but no longer are going to, and that's one of the reasons why we have so many people dying in this war, right, failures to learn, or simply not even necessarily just failures. I don't know why this is all the way down here. But also, at a certain point, that was the idea, to kill as many people as you possibly can, to bloody the other person, right? We compared it to boxers and heavyweight fighters in class, right? And these boxers are going to basically just, where in ancient times, right, these boxers might have been more scrawny, you know, they might get a couple good punches in, and, you know, someone might get, that might be the end of it, right? Whereas now in the industrialized society, where you can have a total war effort and you have people at home basically bringing all of the supplies and creating all the supplies for the front to continuously do this, right? Continuously shell and all that stuff, continuously cannons and ammunition and arms and all of that stuff, right? You can continuously fuel this machine for millions of men, right? It turns in from being knocked out in the first round or two, right, to all of a sudden you have full heavyweight fighters, Rocky and Apollo Creed style, going at it for the full length of the boxing match here, right? And by the end of it, these people are bloodied up to hell, right? Their faces are all crushed, they're swollen, right? They're not looking good at this point. They're taking punch after punch after punch, right? And those punches are more and more people being dead. Society, losing their siblings, their brothers, their husbands, and property, and the damage to society here is just absolutely astronomical. And that's one of the big enduring legacies of this war, right? You're gonna have almost an entire generation of men wiped out, right? I don't know why this. Sorry, I'm gonna try to fix this slide here. Where'd it go? All the way down here for some reason. Can I just erase these? There we go. It doesn't matter that much. Okay, so I'm just going to make this bagger right here. Okay, so we've got Germany, right, as the central powers. You got Austria, Hungary, right, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. You're going to have the Ottoman Empire and the Turks, which are essentially the Turks, right, and you're going to have Bulgaria, right, and you should know these because there might be a question there, so I'm talking about the big ones anyway. The Entente powers, or simply the Allies, right, are going to be known as France, being the big boy here. They're taking the brunt of this attack by the Germans. Everyone talks about French, and their, World War II doesn't go quite nearly as well for them, but without the French and their effort and their sacrifice in World War I, well, this world would be a very different place. Great Britain is going to also get involved right after Germany invades through Belgium and destroys that, or goes, disregards the neutrality there, right? You're going to have Russia, which is going to start in the war, right, to defend Serbia from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And they're going to leave later in the war due to the revolution, as we know. Italy is actually, which would have a alliance with these guys, is going to actually flip over here. And then we know also America, sorry, it's just a little bit below there, and it was giving me a problem as I was trying to fix the formatting there. Okay, so America's going to also join the party here, but they're not going to join until much later, as we know, right? So we looked at the map already, we know the causes, we talked about these things, we talked about trench warfare, right? We talked about the stalemate and the issues facing in the trenches, the exposure, the gas, the constant shelling. You're going to get shell shock as a result, the major doomed charges over and over again we were talking about, the thousands of being killed for minimal gains in either direction, right? There's just simple disregard for human life and waste of human life. It's crazy, and still it's just terrifying and sad to me. I love this picture. It kind of just shows the old mentality, right? This is a French cavalry unit, in the very beginning stages of this war, right? They look like they're from the 1800s. They're still wearing actual armor, metalled breastplates, right? They're still wearing these bright colors. This is actually much more blue than the picture actually shows you. These bright colors, right? That's kind of the way war used to be fought, right? And that's what they're going into it in the first days, which is why we get thousands and thousands of killed, right? We have all of these shells. Look at how many shells. It's absolutely insane, right? Just a picture from the trenches and from the Imperial War Museum, which I'm actually going to be going to in just a couple weeks, so I'll try to bring back some stuff for you guys in class. We got the Christmas truce, the famous Christmas truce. You've got just the conditions, the mud and things like that are going to be experienced in no man's land in the trenches. They're pulling the soldier out. Just the sheer devastation of the shelling and the fighting in the areas. You're going to have battles and walls created with human remains at Verdun, which is basically designed to just kill as many people as possible to try to make the French so basically give up, right, to stop fighting. You're going to have just conditions, all sorts of horrible conditions, in the trenches. The rodents and things are also going to become a problem, right, from the exposure and just food and just men and everything. And I love this picture because you have these prideful soldiers with their Terrier over here, which were bred specifically for this reason, to kill these things, to hunt, right? We went over all the different human element type stuff of the war. I'm not going to read all these sources to you again, but the guy kills his friendly soldier. He steals his gas mask out of sheer fright, and the other one, he lets one of the enemy go, right, to kind of just show the contrasting different sides of the war, right? We talked about the gas, right, all that stuff, really important, obviously. As far as America's early involvement, right, you're going to have a blockade. So America's not going to end up trading with Germany too much, and that blockade is going to ultimately choke out Germany essentially. Toward the end of the war, they're going to have significant shortages, right, of things that they need at home. So the British and the other allies are going to seriously benefit from the U.S. trading, whereas the Germans don't. So the Germans start attacking ships, right, that are bringing things to the war effort, right? The Lusitania is going to be one of them, right? It's this famous passenger liner that gets sunk by a German U-boat. It's a British passenger liner. 128 American citizens are on board. The Americans and British are outraged because they claim, of course, we weren't carrying the ammunition like the Germans said, and it turns out, well, we were lying, right? And the Germans might have been a little bit more justified to destroy this, to sink this ship than we had, ever claimed, and there were ammunitions and things like that on board. There was a video we watched in class. This is actually a picture of the Lusitania sinking from that U-boat, believe it or not. So anyway, the unrestricted submarine warfare is going to die off a little bit for the time being, but as we get later in the war, where Germany is looking to do anything possible to actually end this war, they're going to resume the unrestricted submarine warfare in hopes of being able to choke out Great Britain and make the war so unfavorable that they will quit, right? And if they quit, then the Germans could probably finish off the French much more easily, right? That's the hope. But the thing is doing the unrestricted submarine warfare, it makes it more likely the United States is going to get involved, right? And if the United States gets involved, well, that's a problem for the Germans, because all of a sudden in round 14 or 15, they have a whole other person coming into the fight, right? Who's completely fresh. And that's a problem for the Germans, right? But they're willing to take that gamble, right? And they send off the Zimmerman telegram. To have a picture of it? I do, right here. To Mexico, saying to Mexico, hey, if you guys are willing to go fight America, we will back you up. If you stall long enough that we finish the war over here, we can come over there and help you reclaim the territory that you lost in the Mexican-American War, among other things, right? So the United States is going to get fed up and frustrated for other reasons, of course, too, but ultimately the United States is going to join in, and it's going to help tip the balance in the favor of the Allies, right? So just home front stuff, right? We had to produce all the supplies, converted factories to war-related goods. There was rationing involved as well. I love this picture from the Imperial War Museum as well, where you can just see the supplies, the sheer number of mountains of supplies that need to be brought out to the front and things like that, right? So then we're talking production, right? You're having women heading into the factories to take the spots of the men, right, and all that good stuff, right? The show must go on, right? We got to be able to fuel those boxers all the way into the 15th round, to continue that analogy, right? The production of the shells, right? The shells are super important, and here we go. We get tons of people creating them, right? I also love this picture to show all the different shells that were created in this particular factory, right? So Woodrow Wilson is going to be the president of America at the time, right? And you're going to get the 14 points. Right, his 14 points. Europe is going to mostly ignore this, right? But they are going to pull a couple things out of it. In particular, this idea of the League of Nations, right? The idea is it was going to prevent future wars, right? And they're going to have peace, and you're going to be able to actually actual diplomacy, right? And you're going to then get the Paris Peace Conference, which leads to the Treaty of Versailles. It's going to end the war, and it's going to set ridiculously harsh conditions against Germany, since they were the ones that started it, right? It's really hard to say there's any clear-cut bad guy here, but Germany, did start the war. But remember, they start the war because they felt they had to. Otherwise, they would have lost no matter what. So it was kind of something that they had to do, right? You got people looking into the Hall of Mirrors to watch this historic signing because this war was that bad. People were so... It really shook up the world, guys. It really did. So just to kind of reiterate some things, right? You have the war guilt clause of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany has to accept blame for the war, right? They're going to be forced to pay reparations, 6.6 billion pounds. Land cessions, they're going to be given the territory known as Alsace-Lorraine and other territories back to the French, and their military is going to be limited, right? And this is more or less humiliating to the Germans, right? And these harsh conditions and a couple others, of course, are going to set the stage that we know it, and the economic conditions and things, and the frustrations leading into the Second World War, and ultimately the rise of the Nazis and Adolf Hitler. And there are other similar conditions as well for other Central Power nations than the Germans. Okay, so as far as the outcomes go, right, we are going to have a serious lot of people that are being, you know, casualties, or, you know, people fighting in this war, right? There are 12 million Germans that are going to be fighting. You're going to have almost 12 million Russians, 11 million Germans, 9 million British, 8.4 million French, 7.5 million Austrians, and so on, right? The sheer number of people is insane. Okay, so as far as killed, you're going to also have enormous cost of property, social disruption, all that good stuff, right? You're also, one thing that I didn't mention here, right, the colonies participate, right, and that's what this is, right? This is kind of all of the English colonies, essentially, lending their part. So one soldier from each colony lined up in this picture. I really like this picture, okay? So that's the end of World War I. So I'm going to run through the Russian Revolution probably much more quickly, because the World War I stuff and the imperialism is a lot older and less fresh, okay? Because we are going on here for, I don't want to go on too long, because you guys got to get back to your own studying, and frankly, it's getting late. Okay, so lastly, the Russian Revolution stuff. Let's bring it up. Let it finish loading. What's going on? All right. So, okay, number of different things, right? So during World War I, we know that the Russians are you're gonna get a revolution. It's gonna overthrow the Tsar, right? They're gonna exit the war stage right, if you will, stage east maybe, and they are going to leave, right? And they're going to get swept up into this revolution. They're going to have their own civil war that's going to take place for a number of years after World War I, where some of the Allied powers are going to actually help the people in charge of Russia to prevent the rise of the Bolsheviks and things like that. But anyway, right, so some of the big causes, right, is the Tsarist regime. This whole idea of absolute monarchy in the first place is one of the big causes. You're also going to have, and this is going a little bit above and beyond, right, in 1905 you're going to actually have a revolution as well that's going to kind of dissipate, because Nicholas is actually going to make some concessions with things like a representative government, legislative kind of deal, but ultimately he's going to renege on that and not give it to him, which is going to lead to more animosity, and you're going to have some major issues with famine and things like that, and you're going to get yourself a revolution, right? So anyone who spoke the language other than Russian would be questioned by the Tsar and considered dangerous. Alexander III, he had a secret police, watch schools and universities. Teachers had to send detailed reports on students. There were prisoners that were being shipped out to Siberia. But the big name you need to know here, right, is Nicholas II. Okay, and you do need to know that there are sharp. I have not played any PUBG today, Andrew. Nope, I'm too busy teaching you clowns. So anyway, so there were major sharp. My cat is on my lap. Actually, he's very peaceful. He's sleeping. I don't want to disturb him too much, but here he is. He's like, why did you wake me up? Wah. He's catching his claws. Anyway, so we have a majorly sharp. This is what I get for waking up. Now he's nipping me. So anyway, there are major sharp divisions between the nobility and the peasants, right? That's a big deal, right? And the Tsar isn't going to really resolve those complaints. You're going to get the Tsar acting, he's going to kill a whole number of people. You're going to get shooting at the crowds. The peasants, they ultimately want land, and we're all often landless, right? The whole capitalism thing. Remember how we talked about all the conditions, some of the negative things of capitalism, of the answer key. I do have the test sitting right next to me, actually. But anyway, right? So the workers weren't treated fairly the way they saw it, right? And that's a big deal, right? Because that's going to lead to a lot of the animosity that you're going to get, right? They're working these 12 to 13, 14, 15-hour days, right? They're living in the tenement type apartments that we talked about, right? And you're also going to get the Tsar losing, and Russia losing this humiliating loss to the Japanese, right? With the Russo-Japanese War, they're going to be seen, the Tsar is going to be kind of seen as incompetent. When World War I breaks out, he's actually going to take control of the war effort himself when people kind of call him out for not being there, which is going to go even more disastrous, right? They're going to keep, again, sending these men into these doom charges, machine guns mowing down these people by the thousands, high casualty rates, lack of equipment, all that stuff. Violence is going to break out. as a result of the military defeats, the incompetence, you're going to have a hard time feeding the troops. You're going to have a hard time feeding the people at the same time. If you think about it right, the Ottoman Empire is going to kind of act as a bit of a blockade from the south of supplies and things being able to come up into Russia. So they're kind of on their own. With Germany in the middle there, right? So the troops are going to mutiny, and they're going to refuse to fire on the civilians in St. Petersburg when this kind of revolution is going to take place in February, known as the February Revolution. And ultimately, the Tsar is going to give up his throne, his power. He's going to abdicate in March 1917. He's unable to solve these problems, and they're going to give him a provisional government, right? The provisional government is going to have a Duma, which is going to help rule. This is Alexander Kerensky, in charge between March and October. They are a bit of a moderate government. They are a bit of moderate. No extra credit, I'm sorry, but your extra credit is going to come from hopefully doing significantly better than if you didn't. Although maybe I should start giving extra credit for you guys coming. I mean, that would be a couple extra points would motivate people to come, and they would probably do better all around because of it. So, anyway, right, this is a bit of a moderate revolution, but one of the big things that they don't do is they don't leave the war, right? And so a lot of the problems persist, and when you're going to have the military kind of say, screw this, late in September or so, August, September of 1917, believe it or not, the socialist provisional government here is actually going to call on the Bolsheviks, more or less, to put down that rebellion, that coup by the military, and they do, right? But ultimately then the Bolsheviks are given more power, and you're going to kind of have a really interestingly kind of a bloodless revolution in October, known as the October Revolution this time, led by Lenin, and you're going to get a kind of silent overthrow of provisional power, and the Bolsheviks are going to come into power with Lenin, right? So within days, you're going to get kind of acting on a lot of this socialistic agenda, this communistic, really, agenda at this point. So they're going to order farmland given to peasants and factory workers, right? You're going to get a treaty of signing, basically, with Germany, saying we're leaving the war. They're going to give up some territory to kind of say, get the heck out of here. And then, ultimately, you're going to have the Tsar actually being killed later on, when you're going to get a civil war break out between the people that lose their land to this nationalization. They lose their factories and they lose their farms. You're going to also have a civil war effort by the people that kind of got ousted by the Bolsheviks. So you're going to get this civil war, right? You're going to have the red shirts versus the white shirts, right? And the red shirts are the Reds. They're the communists. You're led by Leon Trotsky in particular. You're going to then also have the white army, which is kind of everybody else, even an international community. America, believe it or not, is going to help the white army after World War I. You're going to have actual boots on the ground in Russia. So that's kind of a big deal as well, right? So how does this all end, right? And this is going to be kind of the end of our slideshow for this evening, considering you just did the mandate system and all that stuff yesterday, so I'm not going to run through it again for sake of time here real quick. But anyway, right, you're going to get the establishment of the Soviet Union, right, the USSR. Lenin's going to become the leader. You're going to have this kind of dictatorship, kind of meant to kind of, how do you say this? So Lenin's ideas were essentially to accelerate the ideas of a natural progression towards socialism, like Marx was kind of saying. So ultimately, these group of leaders, this party, the Bolsheviks, and them essentially they know what's best for the people, and before the people even know what's best for them, essentially, and they push forward their agenda. So that's why you're going to get kind of a dictatorship of Lenin, and ultimately Joseph Stalin is going to come, after that. You're going to get this new economic policy, the NEP, which changes some things, right, some around, because they're trying to placate some people, right? You're going to allow some private property and capitalistic kind of idea, but Lenin's going to die in 1924. It's going to be replaced by Joseph Stalin. Okay. So anyway, I think for now that's it. I've been at this for at least 45 minutes here. So thank you for all of you that came in. If you came in late, you can kind of rewind and watch the rest of it, and it should also be able to be seen on the channel soon. Okay, so good luck tomorrow, guys. Have a good one. Can I stream PUBG, please? It would be fun, for sure. Maybe one day I will, just for kicks. But not for now. I'm going to bed. Not on my bed, but I'm at least coming off of here. Alright, have a good one, guys. Good night. Any last questions, actually, before I do go? I'll ask that. Couple 30 more seconds, then I'm closing the feed. Any last questions? Get it out. No, my cat doesn't sleep in my room. I'm technically allergic to him, so. Anyway, alright. Night, guys. Have a good one. Good luck again.